The emergency klaxon was deafening, a relentless scream echoing through the metallic corridors of Space Station Epsilon 6. My name is Lieutenant Cade Mallory, and I was 3 days into my shift as head of security when the nightmare began. Lieutenant, we've lost contact with the engineering team on Deck 14, came the voice of Corporal Shiro, crackling through my comms. They stopped responding 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes? I growled, already strapping on my sidearm and grabbing my tactical visor. Why didn't you report this sooner? I thought it was a comms glitch at first, Shiro stammered. But then I heard something. I paused. What did you hear? There was a beat of static. Then Shiro whispered, his voice trembling. Screaming. The station shuddered beneath my feet, a deep vibration that seemed to come from the very bones of the structure. Epsilon 6 was a sprawling, labyrinthine installation orbiting the outer rim of Titan. It housed over 300 personnel, and in the 2 years I'd served here, it had always felt secure. Invincible, even. But as I jogged toward the central hub, every instinct screamed that something was horribly wrong. The lights flickered, plunging the corridor into stuttering darkness. My heart raced as I tapped my comms again. Shiro, status report. What's happening to the power? Unknown, sir, Shiro replied, his voice barely audible over the static. Maintenance is working on it, but they are getting strange readings from the core. And a burst of static cut him off, followed by a wet, gurgling sound. I froze mid-step, my hand tightening around the grip of my weapon. Shiro? Shiro, respond. Silence. I was alone in the corridor, the hum of the station's life support systems now eerily quiet. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing, shallow and rapid. I forced myself to move, jogging toward the nearest lift that would take me to Deck 14. The lift doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a corridor that looked like something out of a horror vid. The overhead lights had dimmed to a faint, sickly yellow, and the walls were smeared with a viscous black substance that dripped onto the floor in glistening puddles. The air was thick and humid, carrying a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. Command, this is Mallory, I said, activating my comms. I've reached Deck 14. Something's not right down here. There was no response, only static. My grip on my sidearm tightened as I stepped out of the lift, scanning the corridor with my visor. The tactical overlay displayed no signs of movement, but the eerie silence was enough to set every nerve on edge. I rounded a corner and nearly tripped over a body. It was one of the engineers, their face frozen in a rictus of terror. Deep, jagged lacerations covered their torso, the wounds so severe I could see bone. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to keep moving. Something had done this. Something that wasn't human. As I pushed deeper into Deck 14, the black substance on the walls grew thicker, pulsating faintly like it was alive. My visor's sensors began to glitch, the display flickering as if the station itself was rejecting my presence. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill down my spine. Who's there? I called out, raising my weapon. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the corridor. My visor picked up movement ahead, a blur of motion too fast to track. I fired a shot, the crack of my weapon echoing like thunder, but whatever it was had already disappeared. Command, this is Mallory, I barked into my comms. We have an intruder on Deck 14. Repeat, we have. Before I could finish, something slammed into me from behind, sending me sprawling. My weapon skidded across the floor as I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. I turned just in time to see a shadowy figure retreating into the darkness, its form indistinct but impossibly large. Its glowing red eyes lingered for a moment before vanishing. What the hell are you? I whispered, retrieving my weapon. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now. I continued down the corridor, my every step echoing like a drumbeat in the oppressive silence. The growls had stopped, replaced by a faint clicking sound that seemed to follow me wherever I went. It wasn't until I reached the central maintenance hub that I realized I wasn't alone. 3 figures stood in the room, their backs to me. They were wearing engineering uniforms, but something was wrong. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, their heads twitching as if they were listening to something I couldn't hear. "Identify yourselves," I ordered, aiming my weapon at them. They turned slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. Their faces were wrong. Their eyes glowed with the same red light as the creature I had seen earlier, and their skin was covered in the same black, pulsating substance that lined the walls. "Help us," one of them rasped, their voice distorted and barely human. Before I could react, they lunged at me, their movements unnaturally fast. I fired, the shots echoing in the confined space. 2 of them dropped instantly, but the third kept coming, its clawed hands swiping at my chest. I dodged just in time, delivering a point-blank shot to its head. It collapsed in a heap, the black substance oozing from its wounds. I staggered back, my chest heaving. Whatever this was, it was spreading, infecting the crew, turning them into things, and I had no idea how to stop it. My comms crackled to life, and a familiar voice came through. "Mallory, this is Commander Briggs. What's your status?" "Commander," I gasped, relief flooding through me. "We have a major situation on Deck 14. Something's hunting us. It's infecting the crew, turning them into—" "I know," Briggs interrupted. "It's happening all over the station. We're losing containment." "Containment?" I echoed. "What the hell is this, Commander? What are we dealing with?" There was a pause, and then Briggs said something that made my blood run cold. "It's an experiment. A bioweapon. And we've lost control." I didn't have time to process his words before the station shuddered violently, the lights flickering as an alarm blared overhead. A robotic voice announced, "Critical breach detected. Evacuate immediately." "Briggs, what's going on?" I demanded. "The containment field around the reactor is failing," he said. "If we don't shut it down, the entire station will go up in flames. And the crew." There was another pause. "We're expendable, Mallory. The bioweapon cannot be allowed to escape." The comms went dead. I stared at the black substance creeping along the walls, pulsating like a heartbeat. The creature's growl echoed in the distance, and I knew one thing for certain. We were already too late. The alarm's wail grew louder as the station's lights continued to flicker. I didn't know whether it was the reactor or the bioweapon that was the bigger threat. All I knew was that we were out of time. My comms crackled back to life, and a voice, strained, panicked, came through. "Mallory, do you copy? This is Corporal Shiro." I pressed my earpiece quickly. "Shiro, where are you? I thought I lost you." "I'm on Deck 10, barricaded in the medbay," Shiro said, his breathing heavy. "It's spreading, sir. Whatever this thing is, it's infecting anyone it touches." I saw Ramirez. He wasn't human anymore. I gritted my teeth, trying to steady my voice. "Listen to me, Shiro. The reactor's failing, and we have a bioweapon on the loose. I need you to stay alive and hold your position until I can get to you." Shiro hesitated. "You're coming for me, right? You're not leaving me here." "I'll get to you," I promised. "Just stay put." I wasn't sure if I could keep that promise. I sprinted back toward the lift, but when I pressed the controls, nothing happened. The display blinked error, power failure in dull red letters. Of course. The station's systems were failing one by one, and the lift was no exception. My heart sank as I realized I'd have to use the maintenance access shafts to reach Deck 10. The shafts were narrow, poorly lit, and crawling with who knew what by now. But I didn't have a choice. I pried open the panel to the nearest shaft and climbed inside, my weapon at the ready. The metal walls of the shaft were slick with condensation, and something else. The same black, pulsating substance I'd seen on Deck 14 was spreading here too, its veins crawling like living things. The clicking sound was back, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the tight space. My breathing quickened as I climbed, every movement deliberate, every sense on high alert. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Halfway up, I heard it, a low growl reverberating through the shaft. It was close. Too close. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I looked down, and my blood ran cold. Below me, a shadow was moving, its glowing red eyes fixed on me. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. The creature let out a bone-chilling screech and began to climb, its clawed hands tearing into the metal walls as it ascended with terrifying speed. Panic surged through me as I scrambled upward, my hands slipping on the rungs. The creature was gaining, its guttural growls growing louder. I reached for my weapon and fired blindly down the shaft. The muzzle flash lit up the darkness, and I saw its face, twisted, monstrous, with teeth that looked like shards of glass. The shot slowed it down, but only for a moment. It let out another screech and lunged, its claws raking the air inches from my boots. I climbed faster, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The shaft above me ended in a hatch, but it was sealed tight. Come on, I muttered, fumbling for the emergency release lever. The creature was nearly on me, its breath hot and rancid. I yanked the lever, and the hatch creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through. I pulled myself out and slammed the hatch shut, locking it with shaking hands. The creature slammed into the hatch from below, denting the metal. I backed away, my weapon trained on the hatch as it buckled under the relentless assault. But after a few seconds, the banging stopped. The creature retreated, its growls fading into the distance. For now, I was on deck 12, 2 levels below Shiro's position. The corridor here was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the station's failing systems. The black substance was everywhere, coating the walls and ceiling like a spreading infection. It seemed to react to my presence, pulsating faster as I passed. I made my way toward the emergency stairwell, every step cautious. My visor picked up faint heat signatures ahead, multiple figures, moving erratically. When I rounded the corner, I saw them. They were crew members, or what was left of them. Their bodies were twisted, their limbs elongated and covered in the black substance. Their glowing red eyes turned toward me in unison. They didn't hesitate. They charged. I fired, the corridor lighting up with each shot. The first creature went down, its body twitching as it hit the floor. The second lunged at me, its claws raking my arm as I dodged. I delivered a point-blank shot to its chest, and it collapsed in a heap. The third creature was faster, stronger. It knocked the weapon out of my hands and tackled me to the ground. Its claws tore at my armor, and its face was inches from mine, its jagged teeth snapping. Desperation took over. I grabbed the combat knife from my belt and drove it into the creature's neck. It let out a guttural roar, black fluid spraying from the wound as it thrashed. I pushed it off me and grabbed my weapon, finishing it with a shot to the head. I staggered to my feet, blood dripping from the gash in my arm. My breathing was ragged, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I reached deck 10-20 minutes later, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. The medbay doors were sealed, but I could see Shiro through the reinforced glass. He was alive, but barely. His face was pale, and his uniform was stained with blood. I tapped on the glass, and his eyes widened in relief. He pressed the controls to unlock the door, and I stepped inside. "Sir," he gasped, clutching his side. "I didn't think you'd make it." "Neither did I admitted, helping him to a chair. "What's your status?" He shook his head. "Not good. That thing attacked us. I barely got away." I inspected his wounds. They were deep, but not life-threatening. "We need to get to the reactor," I said. "If we don't shut it down." A deafening roar cut me off. The sound reverberated through the medbay, making the walls tremble. Shiro's eyes widened in fear. "It's here," he whispered. The door to the medbay buckled, and I raised my weapon, preparing for the worst. The creature wasn't just hunting us anymore. It was coming for us. The medbay doors buckled again, the metal groaning under the force of the creature's relentless assault. Each impact sent vibrations through the floor, and I could see Shiro gripping his side tighter, his face pale with fear. My weapon was trained on the door, but even I wasn't sure it would be enough. "Shiro, can you move?" I asked, my voice tight. He nodded weakly. "Barely. But I'll follow your lead." "We're not dying here," I said, more to myself than to him. The next hit tore the door from its hinges, sending it flying into the room with a deafening crash. The creature stepped through the opening, its glowing red eyes scanning the room. It was massive, nearly 7 feet tall, with elongated limbs covered in that same pulsating black substance. Its face was a grotesque fusion of human and something entirely alien, its jagged teeth bared in a snarl. "Move!" I shouted, pushing Shiro toward the emergency exit at the back of the medbay. The creature lunged, its claws slicing through the air where Shiro had been a second ago. I fired 3 shots in quick succession, each one striking its chest. The impacts made it stagger but didn't stop it. It let out a guttural roar and charged again. I grabbed a gurney and shoved it toward the creature, buying us a few precious seconds. "Go, Shiro!" I yelled, firing again as I backed toward the exit. Shiro limped through the door, and I followed, slamming it shut behind us. The emergency exit led to a maintenance tunnel, narrow and dimly lit. The sound of the creature's roars echoed behind us, growing louder by the second. "It's not going to stop," Shiro said, his voice shaking. "Then we don't stop either," I replied, pulling him along. The tunnel twisted and turned, a maze of pipes and flickering lights. The station groaned around us, the sounds of its imminent collapse mixing with the creature's relentless pursuit. I checked my visor's display. It showed the reactor was only 2 levels below us. If we could just reach it, maybe we had a chance to end this. But the creature was fast. Too fast. I could hear its claws scraping against the walls, the clicking sound growing louder. I turned and fired blindly down the tunnel, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating its distorted form. It ducked out of sight, but I knew it was still there, stalking us. We reached a ladder leading down to the reactor core. "Go first," I told Shiro. "I'll cover you." Shiro hesitated but nodded, climbing down as quickly as he could. I held my position at the top, my weapon trained on the darkness. The creature's growl echoed through the tunnel, sending a shiver down my spine. And then it appeared, its glowing eyes locking onto me. "Come on," I muttered, squeezing the trigger. The shots lit up the tunnel, each one striking the creature's chest and slowing its advance. But it didn't stop. It never stopped. It leaped toward me, and I barely managed to dodge, firing one last shot before dropping down the ladder. We landed in the reactor chamber, the heart of Epsilon 6. The room was massive, dominated by a towering cylindrical core that pulsed with unstable energy. Warning lights flashed everywhere, and the air was thick with heat and the acrid smell of burning circuits. "Mallory, this place is falling apart," Shiro said, his voice panicked. "I know," I replied, scanning the room. There was a console near the base of the core, its screen flashing red. That was our only hope. "Can you hold them off?" I asked Shiro. He blinked at me. "Hold them off? With what?" I handed him my spare weapon. "With this. I need time to shut the reactor down." Shiro nodded, his hands trembling as he took the gun. "I'll try." I sprinted toward the console, my boots clanging against the metal floor. The display was a mess of error codes and warnings, but I focused on what mattered, the manual shutdown protocol. The creature roared, its voice echoing through the chamber. I glanced back and saw it climbing down the ladder, its movements unnaturally fluid. Behind it, more figures emerged, infected crew members whose bodies twisted and contorted as they descended. "Shiro, fire!" I yelled. He didn't need to be told twice. The chamber lit up with gunfire as Shiro emptied his magazine into the advancing horde. Several of the infected went down, their bodies crumpling to the floor. But the main creature kept coming, unfazed by the bullets. "Hurry up, Mallory!" Shiro shouted, reloading with shaky hands. I typed furiously, my fingers flying over the console's keyboard. The shutdown sequence was complex, designed to prevent exactly what I was trying to do. The core's energy levels were spiking, the readings flashing dangerously close to critical. "Just a few more seconds," I muttered. The creature leaped from the ladder, landing with a thunderous crash. It roared and charged toward Shiro, swiping with its massive claws. He fired again, but the creature was too fast. It knocked the gun from his hands and slammed him into the wall. "No!" I screamed, drawing my own weapon. I fired at the creature, hitting it square in the back. It turned toward me, its glowing eyes burning with fury. "Come on, you son of a bitch," I said, stepping away from the console. It charged, its claws slashing through the air. I dove to the side, the impact of its attack shaking the floor. I fired again, hitting it in the head. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Behind it, Shiro crawled toward the console, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. "I'll finish it," he gasped, his voice weak. "No, Shiro, stay back," I yelled. But it was too late. The creature turned on him, its claws poised to strike. I fired one last shot, and this time, it hit the creature's glowing chest. It let out an ear-piercing screech, its body convulsing as black liquid sprayed from the wound. The reactor core's alarms reached a crescendo, and the console displayed a final message: manual shutdown initiated. "Shiro, get out of there!" I shouted. The creature lunged at him just as the core's energy spiked, and a blinding light filled the chamber. I felt the floor give way beneath me, and everything went black. I woke to silence. The chamber was dark, the reactor's glow reduced to a faint pulse. Shiro lay nearby, unconscious but alive. The creature was gone, nothing remained but a blackened stain on the floor. We had stopped it. For now. The silence was suffocating. My ears rang from the deafening blast of the reactor's emergency discharge, and every inch of my body ached as I pulled myself to my feet. The reactor chamber was eerily still, bathed in faint red light from the emergency systems. The pulsating core was no longer screaming with instability, its energy levels reduced to a faint hum. "Shiro," I croaked, stumbling toward him. He was slumped against the wall, blood trickling down his face, but his chest was rising and falling. He was alive. "Shiro, wake up," I said, shaking his shoulder. He stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. "Lieutenant," he muttered, his voice weak. "Is it over?" I glanced around the chamber. The black, pulsating substance that had coated the walls was gone, leaving only scorched marks in its place. The air was heavy, but the oppressive presence, the clicking, the growling, the whispers, it was gone. "For now," I said. "But we're not out of this yet." Shiro groaned as he tried to sit up, his face twisted with pain. "The creature. I thought we were dead." "So did I admitted, offering him a hand. "Come on. We need to get to the command center and figure out what's left of this station." We made our way through the corridors, moving slowly. The devastation was worse than I'd feared. Entire sections of the station were dark, the air heavy with smoke and the acrid smell of melted metal. Bodies lay scattered, some torn apart by the creatures, others frozen in expressions of terror. The survivors, if there were any, had either barricaded themselves or were long gone. "Do you think anyone else made it?" Shiro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "But we're going to find out." We reached the command center after what felt like an eternity. The door was partially open, sparks flying from the damaged mechanisms. I pushed it aside and stepped inside, my weapon drawn. The room was a mess. Consoles were smashed, monitors flickered with static, and the floor was slick with blood. But there was movement, a single figure hunched over the main terminal. My heart leapt at the sight of the familiar uniform. "Commander Briggs," I said, lowering my weapon. The figure turned, and my relief turned to dread. Briggs was alive, but just barely. His face was pale, his uniform shredded, and his eyes glowed faintly red. "Mallory," he rasped, his voice distorted. "You shouldn't be here. What happened to you?" I asked, keeping my distance. Shiro stood behind me, his hand trembling on his weapon. Briggs let out a bitter laugh, his body swaying. "It got me. The bioweapon. It's inside me now. You're infected," Shiro blurted. Briggs nodded, his movements jerky. "I fought it. I fought as long as I could. But it's winning." I stepped closer. "Commander, is the bioweapon contained?" Briggs looked at me, his glowing eyes filled with pain. "No. It's intelligent. Adaptive. Even if you stopped the core, it spread. It's in the station's systems. In the air. In me." My stomach churned. "Is there any way to stop it?" "There's only one way," Briggs said, his voice breaking. "We have to destroy the station. Completely. No trace of it can survive." The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. "Destroy the station?" Epsilon 6 wasn't just a research facility, it was home to hundreds of people. And yet, as I looked around at the devastation, I realized there wasn't much of a home left. How? I asked, my voice steady. Briggs gestured weakly to the console. There's a failsafe. A complete self-destruct sequence. But it requires a manual override, from the core. Back to the reactor? Shiro asked, his voice rising in panic. We barely made it out of there alive. Briggs coughed, black fluid dripping from his lips. You don't have a choice. If you don't do this, the bioweapon will spread beyond the station. It'll reach the colonies, the planets. I nodded, my mind racing. What about you, Commander? Briggs gave me a sad smile. I'll hold them off. Whatever's left of me. Go. The journey back to the reactor was even worse the second time. The station groaned under the strain of its failing systems, and the lights flickered more erratically, casting long, ominous shadows. The black substance was returning, crawling along the walls like living veins. It's not gone, Shiro muttered. It's still here. I know, I said, gripping my weapon tightly. When we reached the reactor chamber, the sight was worse than before. The black substance was spreading faster, pulsating with a sickening rhythm. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. And in the center of the room, the creature stood waiting. It was larger now, its form more twisted and alien. Its glowing red eyes fixed on us as it let out a guttural roar, shaking the very floor. Stay behind me, I said to Shiro, raising my weapon. The creature charged, its movements impossibly fast. I fired, the shot striking its chest and slowing it down, but it kept coming. Shiro joined in, his shots more frantic, but they barely seemed to faze it. I dove to the side as the creature swiped at me, its claws tearing through the metal floor. Shiro, get to the console! I shouted. What about you? He yelled back. I'll keep it busy. Just go. Shiro hesitated but obeyed, sprinting toward the console. The creature roared and turned toward him, but I fired again, hitting it in the head. It screeched in rage, its focus shifting back to me. Come on, you bastard, I muttered, circling the reactor. Shiro worked furiously at the console, his hands shaking as he input the codes Briggs had given us. The creature lunged at me, its claws raking my armor. Pain shot through my side, but I ignored it, rolling away and firing again. I need more time. Shiro shouted. We don't have time. I yelled back. The creature roared, its body convulsing as the black substance spread further. It was adapting, becoming something even worse. I knew we couldn't hold it off much longer. Shiro, now or never, I screamed. The console beeped, and Shiro's voice broke through the chaos. It's done. The countdown started. A robotic voice echoed through the chamber. Self-destruct sequence initiated. T-5 minutes. Let's move. I grabbed Shiro and hauled him toward the exit, the creature's screeches echoing behind us. We sprinted through the corridors as the station shook violently. Explosions erupted around us, and the lights flickered wildly. The black substance was everywhere now, pulsating and spreading like a living infection. We reached the escape pods with seconds to spare. Shiro climbed into one, and I followed, slamming the hatch shut. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The pod ejected just as the station detonated. The explosion was blinding, a massive burst of light that consumed Epsilon 6 and everything inside it. The shockwave rocked the pod, sending us tumbling through space. When the light faded, all that remained of the station was a cloud of debris. Shiro and I sat in silence, staring at the wreckage. The bioweapon was gone, but at what cost? Hundreds of lives lost, the station destroyed, and the knowledge that this nightmare had been man-made. Do you think it's really over? Shiro asked, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could. As the pod drifted through the void, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of it. The black substance, the glowing eyes, the whispers, they were burned into my mind. And I knew one thing for certain. Something like that doesn't just die. The end, or maybe, just the beginning.